Hi everybody, my name is Howard Cooper. This is EMV's security standards, and today we're going to be talking about EMV, hoping and making sure that everyone understands at least the basics about EMV today. This is the first of many webinars we're going to be putting on a weekly basis. Let me go ahead and just get started. Once again, this is Howard Cooper from Sterling Payment, and hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. All right. Let's talk about EMV. EMV is a global initiative, and it's a set of security standards utilizing chip-based technology for payment acceptance. That little chip that's showing up on everyone's debit and credit card, that's what this is all about. It's designed to lower the risk of counterfeit card fraud. You know, all these breaches are going on right now, and unfortunately, you know, I'm sure everyone has been affected by this, or most people on the call has probably been affected by this because your information is getting breached. The whole idea of switching to using these chip cards is to reduce that risk. The United States, unfortunately, is one of the last countries to actually get involved and get these standards in place, unfortunately. EMV stands for EuroPay, MasterCard, and Visa. It's the technology behind that little microchip. There's actually an EMV company. It's called EMV Co., which is the unified platform for this technology. And they have a website, emvco.com, that you can continue to read up if you want more information. This little tiny chip, this microchip, has a lot of benefits, to say the least. So as we go through this, I'm going to be explaining what the chip will do for us. It's certainly going to offer better security than using that mag stripe that's on the credit card. Okay, so the goal of EMV, it's, as I said, to safeguard merchants against counterfeit card fraud. And more importantly, you know, everything we do in credit card processing is now geared towards protecting cardholder data. This is going to protect the cardholder from fraudulent cards being reproduced. Reproducing a credit card that has a chip in it is next to impossible. And the cost of a fraudster trying to, you know, to recreate this chip, they're a very expensive attempt to do. So this should, for the most part, decrease the overall face-to-face credit card fraud exponentially. And that's the goal of EMV. EMV is a standard practice in most other major countries. In Europe, in Canada, quite frankly, what EMV has done for those, you know, those countries has brought face-to-face fraud down into the single digits, to where right now most of our fraud face-to-face happens because of the mag stripe and the stolen card information. The fraud because of all these breaches. What I'd like to do very quickly is ask a quick poll question. And Emily, can you bring up that poll question? I want to see where everyone stands right now. Okay, so on your screen you should see a question: how prepared are you for this EMV shift? You know, and it's a 1 through 5. 5 being you're ready, you're in place, you have everything done. 4, you're still evaluating, you're probably going to need some assistance. 3, you understand it, you just haven't done anything yet. 2 is you're saying, what's EMV? Maybe that's one of the reasons why you're on the call. You really don't know what it is. And then lastly, number 1, it doesn't apply to you because you are 100% card not present. And while you're filling this out, just so everyone understands, card not present business-to-business transactions do not apply to EMV. EMV is only for face-to-face transactions. It could be mobile, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. It could be at a kiosk. It could be, you know, once again in a retail location. So, okay, and let's see.
Poll now.
Go ahead and close up the poll, and let's see where we end up here.
Okay.
And it looks like nobody, unfortunately, on the call is actually ready. And folks, it's not a surprise. 42% of you, the EMV doesn't apply, which we're going to go through. It might at some point, and most people in this case, it looks like everyone's still trying to figure things out. So that all being said, EMV, as I said, is really for card-present transactions. For a merchant that is B2B, that may get into mobile processing at some point, okay? Mobile processing is going to apply to EMV in the future. So if you start doing things on a mobile basis, for whatever reason, this will apply to you as well. So let's talk about why EMV is more secure. And it's a three-step process. It authenticates the card, okay? We're verifying the card holder, and then the transaction is authorized. Here's what's interesting about this. Number one, the authorization, that chip creates a cryptogram. So when you put the card in, it's called dipping it, okay, into the terminal, into that EMV slot, okay, or you tap the card for the tap technology, which is called NFC. It creates a cryptogram, and that piece of information goes to the issuer, okay? It also does a validation when you either put a PIN number in or you're signing for that transaction. That's the cardholder verification. And then lastly, the issuing bank also has to validate it. So in this case, for an EMV transaction, there's a lot of steps here. The transaction for EMV goes to, okay, number one, it's going to go to the acquirer. That's the credit card processor. So the first step is the transaction sent to the acquirer. The data is also sent to the issuing bank. Both of those entities have to respond back, okay? And then we have to get the EMV responses, put them back into the terminal, and then display it. An EMV transaction can take 3 to 5, 7, 9, 11 seconds, maybe longer, if in case you're using an IP connection. If you're using a dial-up connection, an EMV transaction could take 30 to 60 seconds or longer. So keep this in mind. If you have to go to EMV and you want to get set up, you may want to try to make sure this is an IP-based connection, not a dial-up connection, because there's going to be a bit of frustration on dial-up connections because of the timeliness and because of the communication. Once again, you're communicating with two different entities, and then it has to communicate back to that POS device or credit card terminal. So just to route this whole thing, understand there are several steps in here, okay? What's important to understand about this is an EMV transaction takes time. Okay, so here's the three different verification methods. One is chip and PIN. That is the standard in the other countries, okay? Chip and PIN is not going to be implemented as a requirement for the United States for probably another 3 to 5 years. All of your transactions from an EMV standpoint for the time being, let me rephrase. Most of your transactions will likely be chip and signature. If you're dealing with a governmental entity, it may be a required chip and PIN. Okay, and all terminals and all EMV devices will be able to accept chip and PIN when the PIN is issued. Okay, but for the time being, everything that you're going to be doing, if it's a face-to-face transaction, will be chip and signature, which means you're putting the credit card and dipping it into the terminal, or you're using the NFC device, which is that near-field communication. Okay, that's the tap technology. It's been around a while. So that's chip and signature. The third is a no card holder verification. That's ultimately when you're using the NFC, the near field communication. There's nothing to sign. That's the tap technology. So those are the verification methods to expect out there. And once again, over time we will be going to chip and PIN. I wouldn't expect this to happen for another 3 to 5 years before that becomes a mandate. And ultimately, as I said, if you deal with the government, you may end up with a chip and PIN transaction. All of your merchant services providers, if they're issuing the EMV credit cards or EMV solutions, they will be able to accept chip and PIN and chip and signature at this point. Okay, let's talk about the liability shift. And ultimately, this is something that's very confusing, okay, and I'm going to put this in layman's terms. The liability shift occurs today. Today is October 1st. And there is a lot of hoopla around this big liability shift. There's a lot of organizations out there that are telling you you have to get this switched out by October 1st. If you don't, you're going to be, liable for all transactions. Okay, there's a lot of frenzy happening where there are companies that are selling these credit card terminals for exorbitant amounts of money. Number one, everyone needs to take a step backwards and digest what we're going to go over here with the liability shift. The liability shift it's relatively simple. Okay, as I said, today's the day that this happens, and that's just a couple other dates. In October, it's going to go to the fuel dispensers. So what I want you to focus on is the third one down, where it says chip card plus mag stripe terminal equals merchant. The liability of these transactions, okay, if somebody gives you a chip card, okay, they have an EMV ready credit card, and you unfortunately are not prepared to accept that card, so you don't have your EMV device, and solution in place, then if it's a fraudulent transaction, if it's a stolen credit card, stolen number, or whatever that is, you don't have a way to actually process that transaction. So ultimately, you're liable at that point. That's the one situation where you're liable. Okay? So if all these other organizations out there are creating all this frenzy saying you need to get all this, all this done, or all the transactions are going to be your responsibility, we're talking about one chargeback risk, which is a stolen credit card or a stolen credit card number, and a card recreated being used at your location. So the only scenario is if somebody presents you a card that has a chip on it and you don't have a way of accepting that EMV transaction, you're liable. In all the other scenarios, in a retail, I'm talking once again retail, okay, if they present you a mag card, it doesn't matter how you accept it, the issuing bank is liable because the card is the responsibility of the issuing bank to be issued to the consumers. So most of you, for example, right now in your wallets, most of you have cards that have chips on them, but there are still a few that aren't issued yet. As of today, 67% of cards have been issued. Okay, there's still 33% of the cards haven't been switched out yet, and it's not likely until the mid next year when almost all the cards in the upper 90% will be switched out. So some of the issuing banks haven't gotten around to doing that yet. So I understand, and they are taking 100% of the risk and liability in that case. Okay, if it's still a mag card, and I say mag card, I'm talking the cards that have the strips on it, not the cryptogram or the chip technology, and you're using an EMV-based terminal. EMV-based terminals can still accept a swipe. Okay, but once again, if the card doesn't have the chip in it, it's still the responsibility of the issuing bank. And then lastly, okay, if it's a chip card that's used, it's an EMV terminal that you have or an EMV system, and it still is a stolen credit card, the issuing bank is liable. And then in a B2B structure, it's the same thing. The first line, and just to make sure everyone understands, a keyed-in credit card, e-commerce, business to business, card not present, phone sales. If the card is not in person, it is exempt. It does not qualify for EMV. Okay? Therefore, on fraudulent transactions that are done on the telephone, the issuing bank is still liable. So for business to business transactions, for the 40-some% that said you're B2B, you never physically see a credit card, okay, you don't have to worry about this. Only in the case that you do face-to-face transactions. EMV is not necessarily going to affect you. The second one down in B2B is somebody walks in, and let's assume you have counter sales. Same situation as retail. Okay, they give you a swipe transaction, but they don't have a chip in it. You're using your software device or your virtual terminal, and you're ready for EMV, but the card issued is not. The issuing bank takes responsibility. It's the same scenario as retail. You're using a virtual terminal or a POS device or an ERP system, and if you don't have it supported, you're not set up, and somebody gives you a chip card, that's when you're liable. So same solution, same situation as retail, but in this case, once again, because your system is not set up to accept that chip, then you're liable. So hopefully everyone understands on the call, the liability shift affects stolen credit cards, okay, and recreated. It's not necessarily for the B2B, it's really face-to-face transactions. Okay, so here's the adoption rate, as I said. So 71% of issuing banks by the end of 15, okay, and 71% of that's credit cards, 41% of debit cards will have an EMV chip in it. But folks, you're not alone as far as the adoption rate, okay? By the end of the year, only 47% of you are going to be ready that need to be ready. Of the gateway and solution providers, when I say solution providers, I don't have a slide on this, but software companies, virtual terminal providers, 21% will have something by the end of the year. So if a chip card is presented, let's assume that's face-to-face, okay, the software provider ultimately would then take the responsibility if they don't have a solution in place that you can use. So whoever drops the ball, if fraud occurs, takes on the responsibility of the transaction. Okay? But once again, you're not alone if you're not ready yet. So when we look at a chip card, you have that chip in there. It contains two things. Okay? All cards are going to have the chip and they're going to have a magnetic strip. Some cards are going to be manufactured, and if you look at that little symbol, that's the contactless or wireless symbol that we see. Contactless cards are going to be used for it's called tap technology. On a credit card terminal, oftentimes when you're shopping right now at the grocery stores, most of them are all set up to use tap technology. It's been around for about a decade. It's going to become prevalent now. And for those transactions oftentimes, for example, like in grocery, you don't need a signature. It's just tapping the credit card and going, okay? The last one is just making sure everyone understands. A cryptogram, okay, is a secure one-time code that's created by the chip on the credit card, okay? Every transaction, a new cryptogram is created. Thus, it makes it a secure transaction. So there are three ways to accept EMV. As we talked about, there is the contact reader slot used to dip the cards. I know it's a strange term, dip, but that's when you slide the card into the EMV slot and it reads that chip. The second way is the contactless reader, like we just talked about. You either tap it or you wave it on top. And then third, which we're going to start seeing more of, is the contactless readers. Okay? On the left-hand side bottom, you see there's the iPhone, and there's one of the companies called VivoPay, and there's going to be a number of these out there. They're going to plug right into the audio port of your cell phone, and you're going to have the ability to accept the tap technology in a mobile solution, okay? And they're all, as of today, I don't believe any are released yet into production. There's probably 30 or 40 of them that are being produced right now and being tested. So one thing that everyone's going to have to understand as well, the processors, all the EMV capabilities for processors, okay, for the software providers, for the ERP systems that are coming up with solutions, for the hardware producers, everybody has to get in line, and then they have to go through certification with the card brands one by one, and certifying that the EMV devices or software solutions or gateways are up to standard, and then they get signed off on. There is a backlog for EMV certification across the board because unfortunately everyone waited to the last minute. Thus the reason why you will find that some of the solutions that you're using today, whether it be with Sterling or anybody else, they have not completed certification. The backlog will clear up eventually. Just be patient, okay? And part of this is assessing risk and how important EMV is going to be to getting this up and running for you. We're going to go through that in just a second. So just understand there's 3 ways to accept it, okay? Once again, there's contact, contactless, and then I'm going to call it mobile. And that's using the near field communication, NFC. Okay, so let's talk about the EMV plan, the next 30 days. Okay, for some of you, it's not going to be a big deal because once again, it doesn't apply. You're B2B, you don't see a credit card. So you all can breathe easy. But everybody else, let's review. The first thing you want to review is your chargeback volume, specifically related to fraud. Okay, this is how you're going to assess your exposure. So if you are prone to chargebacks, and it's specific chargebacks due to fraud, stolen credit card information, then EMV is going to play a role in helping you reduce chargebacks, and this is going to be something that's going to be important to your company. If all of your chargeback volume is due to other reasons, okay, whatever those reasons are, and there are 44 different reason codes for chargebacks. If it's other reasons, it's probably not going to apply as much. So just keep that in mind. Assess your chargeback volume, okay, from a fraud standpoint, and identify if your risk parameters justify implementing EMV as a priority. It might not. Number 2, contact your merchant services provider. Inquire about their enablement plan for EMV and then upgrading all the consumer-facing devices. When EMV is enabled, find out when the date is, their target date. Typically, most companies, ERP, hardware suppliers, software suppliers, they're all issuing the plan of action and the dates to expect these things to happen. Check it out, talk to those organizations, and find out, once again, if it's a necessity, when you should expect to get that up and running. Okay, if this is something that you need to get up and running quickly, and your current software, your current hardware is not ready, your current processor or system is too far out, and you want to get something up and running quickly, talk to them and see what alternatives are. You can always talk to us as well. We have EMV solutions that are available today. So I'll throw that in. It's important if this is something that you need to get up and running quickly and you're using, a POS device or system that does not and unfortunately won't be ready for several months, look for options because it should be something you want to get up and running pretty quickly. And then last but not least, establish a game plan if EMV is necessary for your business. Okay? All right, I want to talk about a couple myths and put some things in reality here, because with all of the EMV hype, okay, let me debunk a few things. Myth number one, implementing EMV is required and will be enforced by a government or industry regulation. There is no EMV police, and folks, EMV is not a law, it's not a mandate, okay? This is something that is a decision that you have to make. It is not a requirement. Now, that being said, if your organization falls into one of those higher risk categories, you probably want to get it in place. But there's no one that's going to be knocking on the door to see if you're compliant. Your clients, if you have face-to-face transactions, will probably be the ones giving you grief if you are not compliant and you're not accepting their cards with that chip technology. So keep that in mind. It is not law. It is not a requirement. It is a liability shift. Okay? Number 2, it's required to comply with PCI DSS, and that's not the case either. I got an advertisement from a competitor flat out saying, if you're not EMV compliant, you are going to fail PCI DSS. It's not true. Okay? It can be a component of your security, but once again, it is not a requirement to have this in place to be PCI compliant. Okay? It's not mandated, and implementing EMV is not going to make you compliant. Okay, 2 more myths. Number 3, once you implement EMV, you're not going to be using the mag stripes on those cards, and that's not the case either. Mag stripes are going to be on credit cards for a very, very long time, okay? Simply because it's until every POS device, every hardware and software device has that completed, you have to have a way to accept swipe transactions if EMV is not completed. So we would expect the mag stripes will still be on the cards for many, many years to come. Here's the key to understand about this. When you go into an organization that has chip technology and you try to swipe it, and you have a chip card, and you try to swipe it, it should tell you rejected. You have to use the technology. It's going to automatically convert to the most secure transaction type. So if you try to, if EMV is implemented at the location, you try to use the chip card, or excuse me, you try to use the EMV or the swipe portion of it, that terminal or that system should reject that swipe, and it should force you to put the card in. The last myth is it protects you from a security breach. And unfortunately, as we all like to wish, it doesn't protect you from a breach. You still have to keep your network secure. You still have to follow PCI DSS rules and regulations, okay? It's going to protect you from the use of counterfeit cards. While there is no way to completely get rid of theft, and fraudsters will be able to create these cards, it's likely they're not going to because of the cost, but there is no 100% guarantee that we're going to be able to get rid of it, okay? So last but not least, I want to open this up for questions, and Emily, if you can flip the switch and let me know if there's any questions that have come through on the text portion, or if you want to turn this up. I'll go ahead and shut up for a few seconds. And folks, if you have questions, please ask away.
One thing, Howard, thank you. That was very informative. Couple of things. One, I did receive a question that asked whether or not the slides would be available after the call, and yes, we will make the presentation slides available to everyone. So that will be available after the call, one. And then two, secondly, I just wanted you to touch really quickly on the fact that a number of the people on the call mentioned that they were 100% card not present. Talk a little bit about the potential threat of online potential fraud moving from the card to the online world of people do commerce. Because that.
I got you. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so let me explain what she's talking about. So with B2B transactions being 100% card not present, and EMV only pertaining to card present transactions, what they saw in Europe and Canada and the other countries that implemented EMV, there was a fraud shift, okay? Since the fraudsters couldn't recreate the cards and then go into locations and use those counterfeit cards, the shift of fraud occurred in a card not present environment. So in essence, what's going to happen, folks, is you may see a shift and more transactions, okay, become fraudulent in that business-to-business setting. So if fraudsters can't get the cards through in a retail setting, they're going to try it somewhere else. So the chances are you may see an uptick in stolen cards being used in card not present transactions. So make sure you turn your settings and tighten those up a little bit for address verification and for CVV codes. Additionally, there are a lot of platforms we can really turn up the advanced fraud settings if we need to grade transactions if you're in a higher risk B2B setting. So great point, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. Obviously, we don't want to, instill any additional fear, but just wanted to make sure people do understand that there could be a potential liability even in the card not present environment. And then really quickly, I just want to get an idea of what type of systems people are on. So I'm running a really quick poll for those who are on the call just to get an idea what type of system you're on. If you guys could just really quickly vote and let me know where you are. That gives us a better idea in terms of suggestions, in terms of how we should tell you to approach different things. Another presentation that we do is about basic payment processing and how to deal with PCI compliance, and these are things that are relevant. So 80% of you guys have voted, and all right, so I will close the poll and let you guys see what the results are.
Mm-hmm. 77% virtual terminal, 23%. 31% card terminal. Okay, so it looks like most organizations here, yeah, there's a fair share of both. Okay, if you're on a virtual terminal and you're swiping cards, most of the virtual terminal providers will be coming out with EMV readers. It's going to be replacing those little mag stripe readers that everyone uses, the USB ports. The EMV readers for face-to-face transactions for virtual terminals will be a little pricier. So just food for thought. They range from $220. I've seen them go up to $600. So once again, depending on your liability, your risk, it may depending on how quickly you want to get this put in place, just understand it is going to be a much more expensive reader because of the technology. From a credit card terminal standpoint, credit card terminals, EMV-based card terminals, do not cost more than $275, folks. Don't spend more than that. Okay? Most of the EMV-based terminals are going to be cost around, depending on the brand, around $250. The most expensive one I've seen that had more technology at port, they're around, as I said, $250 to $275. And just as a side note, don't lease terminals. You'll never get your money out of it. Okay, Emily?
Yep.
Are there any questions?
Well, I am opening the lines to people if they want to ask a question. Most of you are on, for those of you on the phone, you can unmute yourself if you have a question. I know a number of you are unmuted. I think someone's trying to ask a question, but we cannot hear you.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes.
Yep. I still can't hear you, unfortunately. If you want to email or text in the question, it might be easier for us to answer it.
Actually, if you're on the computer, there's a little chat box. You can type your question in right there in the chat box, and we can answer that if you're having difficulty. I do have one question. It says, if a customer has a EMV card and the business only has a magnetic machine, then we will not be able to accept the card at all. So you can
you will be able to, yeah, you will be able to accept that card. You'll have to slide the card through the mag stripe reader because the cards are still going to have the mag stripe. But understand, you will be liable if that is a fraudulent card. That's part of the shift. So yeah, you'll still be able to accept the card, just not using the chip. You'll have to slide it through or key it in.
Okay, I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
We have an online system where everything is typed in, the card number, but we do have face-to-face. We don't actually have a swipe. Is that going to pertain to us at all? If we're typing in the actual card number, but it's still face-to-face?
Well, yes and no. So you're not actually accepting any face-to-face you are accepting face-to-face transactions, but you're keying them all in, is what we're saying.
Yes.
Okay. So in your case, and your case is not atypical. There's a lot of organizations that just don't have card readers. If they do show up in person, technically you're supposed to accept that as a either swiped or a dip transaction. So if it is a fraudulent card, and ultimately you don't have to change the way you're doing it. okay? But since a card is presented, it's a chip card, it is presented, technically you're supposed to. Now, I'm going to say uh, technically, okay, because when you key in a card, if EMV doesn't apply to you, how will the issuing bank know that that was a fraudulent transaction and the person actually showed up? So the only way they would know is if the person whose card was used, okay, or basically it's, yes, it applies to you. Technically, you should have a way of accepting that card, but the chances are it's going to be tough for them to find out the person was actually there with a card in hand. That's what I'm trying to say. So, okay, and once again, technically you're supposed to accept a in-person card using that cryptogram, that chip, okay, but you would be liable if the issuing bank found out the card was in person. The card was, the person was actually there.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Great question. Does anybody have any other questions? We had a question yesterday, and somebody just emailed this in. They use a kiosk for their shows, and does a kiosk apply to EMV or vice versa? And in this case, a kiosk is also considered a face-to-face transaction, so the kiosk technology should be upgraded to accept either the tap technology, that NFC, or a transaction that the card can be dipped into. That is, even though there's not a physical person there, it is still considered a face-to-face transaction. So EMV would apply to a kiosk. Any other questions? Emily, do you see anything on your side?
I do not have any other questions on my side. However, I would like you to take a second and introduce yourself. You forgot to do that at the beginning of the call, and just briefly introduce yourself.
Not a problem. So I am Howard Cooper. I'm the host of the Ask Howard series, which is a weekly, I hold office hours to answer any question about credit card processing. I've been in credit card processing better than 15 years with a couple different companies. I'm an expert in interchange and interchange management. There's not much I haven't been involved in as far as credit card processing, and B2B credit card processing, and I'm a fantastic resource for all things credit card processing related. So I'm the product manager for the B2B group for Sterling Payment. I apologize for not introducing myself up front. I was so excited to get to talk about this lovely topic. And also, on a weekly basis, we hold webinars. I also hold the Ask Howard conference calls. So on this screen, you're going to see if you need more help, if you like a one-on-one consultation, we didn't really, this didn't apply to you, but you have a different question, you didn't want to say it online, we are happy to accept an email. Bridget Kime, the last one we did, we had quite a few emails. Please contact Bridget. She's going to coordinate everything and organize all the responses, and then we'll get back to you, and talk with you on a one-on-one basis if we need to. Ultimately, we want everyone to get to the point where they're comfortable with the EMV and they understand what's necessary.
Yep, and these slides will be available, but if you need the telephone number, just really briefly, again, the number is 888-564-9564, and that's extension 3025. And if no one else has any questions, really want to take the time and say thank you guys for joining us on this topic, and the webinar slides as well as the replay of this video, of this webinar, will actually be recorded. You will receive a separate email with the details. So feel free, if you weren't able to catch something on the call, listen to the replay again, as well as share it with anyone else on your team or in your organization that needs to come up to speed a little bit on EMV. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys, and thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time today.